It started on a cold night in the middle of a brutal prison riot. Inside the steel walls of Rikers Island, chaos erupted. Guards scrambled, sirens blared, and the deafening sound of slamming metal doors echoed through the halls. But what was really happening? Behind the scenes, the gangs of Rikers were flexing their power. Inmates weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for control. And it wasn't just about turf. It was about who would live and who would die. The authorities thought that they had contained the situation, but just hours after the riot, the most shocking discovery was made. A body was found in cell block C, lifeless, eyes wide open in terror. The victim was Anthony "Tony" Alvarez, a well-known figure in the prison's underground gang world. It wasn't just his death that shocked everyone, it was the way he died. His body was positioned as a message, and that message would lead to a deadly game of power and blood. But who sent it? Detective Maria Sanchez was called in to investigate. A tough, seasoned investigator, she had spent years handling the violent and dangerous cases that came out of Rikers. But this was different. The body wasn't found by the guards, nor was it discovered during the riot. It was planted, left in plain sight, a deliberate signal to the entire prison population. Maria knew the situation was far worse than anyone imagined. The prison gangs, namely the Bloods and the Aryan Brotherhood, had been clashing for years, but now something was changing. Maria felt it in the air. The truce that had held the two gangs together was falling apart, and Tony's murder was just the start. A deeper conspiracy was lurking beneath the surface, one that had its roots in power, betrayal, and corruption. As Maria examined Tony's body, she realized something that made her skin crawl. His hands were folded in a way that indicated he wasn't killed. In a fit of rage, he had been calmly executed. There was no struggle, no evidence of a fight. This was a calculated act. A clear message to anyone who crossed the line in the world of Rikers. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that someone on the inside was pulling strings. She began questioning the guards. Who had access to the cell blocks? Who knew Tony's schedule? And why wasn't it reported earlier? Everything was adding up to a single truth. Rikers Island was no longer just a prison, it was a war zone. And the real battle was one of power, control, and survival. In the chaos of the riot, another disturbing detail surfaced. A guard was found dead in a nearby office, his body cold. His throat was slit in the most gruesome manner, but what stood out the most was the signature on his uniform. The blood was smeared in a way that spelled a message: the brothers own this place. Maria took a deep breath. She knew this wasn't just about gang rivalry anymore. This was something darker. The Aryan Brotherhood had made their move. And it wasn't just about controlling the cells, it was about taking control of everything: money, power, and the very soul of Rikers Island. But what Maria didn't know yet was that the true mastermind behind this game of violence and manipulation wasn't just an inmate, it was someone much closer to her than she realized. And this discovery would shatter everything she thought she knew about the system. As Maria looked through these papers on Tony's desk, she found a crumpled note tucked between some old photographs. Her eyes widened as she read the words. If you want to survive, you need to choose a side. The Bloods or the Brotherhood. There's no room for anyone else. Just as Maria was about to leave, her phone rang. It was the coroner's office. "We found something," the voice said, breathless. "You need to come down here, now. The real cause of death, and it wasn't what you thought." Maria's heart raced. What was going on at Rikers Island? Who was orchestrating this violence, and what was their ultimate goal? The phone call left Maria with a sense of dread she couldn't shake. She knew that what she was about to find out would shake the foundation of everything she thought she knew about Rikers Island. She was deep in it now, too deep to turn back. The truth was hiding just beneath the surface, and she could feel it like a weight in her chest. At the coroner's office, the air was thick with tension. The bright fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Maria stepped into the sterile room. The technician looked up at her, his face pale. "You need to see this," he said, leading her to the steel table where Tony Alvarez's body had been laid out. But Maria wasn't prepared for what she saw next. The coroner had already done an initial examination, and something didn't sit right. As Maria leaned in closer, she saw a small, almost indiscernible mark on the side of Tony's neck. It wasn't a wound from a weapon. It was something far more subtle. The technician pointed to the mark. "It looks like he was injected with something, a needle mark. It's hidden under the skin, but it's there." Maria's mind raced. She wasn't just dealing with a gang war anymore. This was something deeper, Someone had orchestrated Tony's death with precision, drugging him to render him unconscious before his execution. This wasn't just a message anymore. It was a calculated move to show absolute power and control over not just the inmates, but the guards and the system itself. Whoever did this has access to everything, Maria muttered to herself. The needle wasn't a random drug, it was a tranquilizer, something designed to make sure the victim didn't fight back. It meant Tony had been calm, collected, even in his last moments. That made it all the more chilling. "What do we know about Tony's contacts?" Maria asked, her voice steady but tense. Who could have had access to him? The technician shook his head. It is hard to say, but if he was involved with the gangs, that's a whole different story. Maria walked out of the room and into the corridor, thinking. The gangs had to be involved, but it felt like this wasn't just a random killing. The Aryan Brotherhood's mark on the guard's uniform, the body positioned as a message, it was all too organized. This was bigger than gang rivalry. This was about taking over Rikers Island. But who was pulling the strings? She had to talk to someone who knew Rikers better than anyone, Officer Ramon Garcia. He had worked at the facility for over 15 years and knew the prison's undercurrents like no one else. If there was anyone who could give her insight, it was him. Maria found Garcia in the break room, sipping coffee in his usual quiet, brooding way. He looked up as she entered, and there was something about the way he looked at her that made her uneasy. His eyes were tired, but there was a sharpness to them, something Maria recognized from years of working with seasoned officers. "You're here for the Alvarez case, right?" Garcia asked, his voice low. Maria didn't waste time. "I need to know everything. Who's really in control at Rikers right now?" Garcia hesitated, taking a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "It's not just the gangs, Maria. The problem is deeper. The gangs aren't just fighting for control of the inmates, they're fighting for control of the entire prison system. And if they have that, they can control everything that happens on the outside. We're talking about money, drugs, even political power." Maria's stomach churned as she listened. It was like a puzzle coming together, but the pieces didn't fit. The level of control the gangs had over Rikers, over the staff, it was more than just turf wars. It was about dominance, and Maria was in the middle of it. "Do you think Alvarez was just a casualty, or was he part of a big air plan?" Maria asked. "Both," Garcia replied. Tony was trying to play both sides. He was working with the Brotherhood, but he had connections with the Bloods too. Maria arrived at Rikers Island with a cold sense of urgency gripping her chest. Another guard missing this time, Officer Eric Lawson, the same one who had been involved in the initial investigation of Tony Alvarez's death. The fact that he had disappeared without a trace was the final piece of the puzzle. Everything pointed to the fact that something much more organized and sinister was at play. It wasn't just gang rivalry anymore, it was a calculated takeover of the entire system. Maria walked quickly down the corridor, her boots echoing loudly in the quiet hall. Rikers Island, despite its monstrous reputation, felt unusually quiet today, and Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. She found herself staring at the thick concrete walls as she passed, wondering just how many secrets they held within. Her phone buzzed in her pocket again. It was an update from the control room. Officer Lawson's locker had been found empty. But there was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of foul play, nothing except for a strange note left inside. The note read, "The clock is ticking. Choose your side." Maria's stomach twisted. She knew exactly what that meant. Whoever was behind this, whoever had orchestrated the deaths of Tony Alvarez and now Lawson was sending a message, one that was impossible to ignore. Maria made her way to the guard locker room where Lawson's belongings had been found. She felt the weight of the building pressing down on her, like the walls themselves were conspiring to keep the truth hidden. If Lawson was in on something, it had to be big. But what could it be? Why target him? Maria picked up the phone and dialed Garcia. "Garcia," she said as soon as he picked up. "Lawson's gone, and we've got a note. Same message. Choose your side. I need everything you know about him, now." There was a brief pause before Garcia replied. "I don't know much, Mar. But Lawson, he's been on the inside for years. He's seen it all. But lately, I don't know. He'd been acting strange, like he knew something he wasn't saying. I think he was starting to get scared. Get me the full file on Lawson. Now." Maria hung up and looked around Lawson's locker room. The space was cold and empty, just like his disappearance. Something felt off about this place, the way the air seemed to thicken with every passing minute. But there was no time to waste. She turned on her heel and made her way to the control room. Inside, the officers were all standing around the monitors, staring at one screen in particular. Maria approached, and the officer in charge, Detective Ramirez, gestured for her to come closer. "Maria," Ramirez said, voice low, "you need to see this." On the screen, there was a blurry image of a figure in the hallway. It was late at night, the usual hum of the fluorescent lights flickering above. The figure moved quickly, but there was something unsettling about the way they walked. Calm, collected, like they knew exactly where they were going. The figure stopped in front of a cell, then disappeared from the camera's view. "Who is that?" Maria asked, leaning closer. Ramirez shook his head. "We don't know. The feed's grainy, but it looks like we're in the hallway near cell block D, right where we found Tony Alvarez." Maria's pulse quickened. Cell block D was where the gangs ruled. That was the epicenter of everything. It wasn't just a coincidence that the figure had stopped there. The question was, who was that person? Maria turned to Ramirez. "Check the logs. I want to know everyone who was on duty that night." Ramirez nodded and started typing furiously on his keyboard. But before he could get far, another alert flashed across the screen. A disturbance in Cell Block C. Maria's heart skipped a beat. Cell Block C had always been a trouble zone, home to some of the most dangerous inmates. She didn't hesitate.